Hey everyone, welcome to Assessments Demystified. My name is Kristen Lehman. I am the Director of Educational Services at Hewitt Learning. We're a nonprofit organization designed to bring educational resources to homeschoolers and we have programs, we have curriculum, and one of the things we offer is the PASS test. And so we have a lot of resources for assessments along the way. So let's go ahead and jump into this. One of the biggest questions I get as a director at this nonprofit is, why do I need to worry about assessing? Why do I need to worry about testing? What's the big deal? And the biggest reply I usually get is, well, the only reason I'm doing it is to meet my state's requirements. And that's fair. That's a fair reason. And it's one that for some people, that's the only reason they will test. But testing is not the only type of assessment. And that's one of the things I want to look at today is the different types of assessments. We'll talk a little bit at the end about testing as well, but I want to talk primarily about assessments and why use assessments if my state doesn't require it. The next big reason to work with assessments is to understand your students' strengths and their weaknesses. And that's a big one, to be able to not just see what areas they're strong in, but see what holes where they might need a little bit more support, a little bit more structure, and assessments are a good way to do that. The other reason is to affirm that mutual understanding, and that's a big one, that's a tricky one. I want to take a closer look at learning objectives and this piece here for a moment. Learning objectives is an educational term. And a lot of times I find in homeschoolers, even in my own home with my own kids, a lot of times there's a misunderstanding of what the expectations are. My kids will say, look at all this stuff I did over here. And I'll go, but look at all the stuff you were supposed to be doing. And there's this little area where we overlap and this little area where, yeah, they did some of what I asked them to do, but really I'm seeing them missing this whole big chunk over here, and they're going, but you're not recognizing all this work I did over here. And there's that miscommunication. And so how do I avoid that? How do I use these learning outcomes as a tool? How do I let them inform my choice of teaching strategies, my course activities, my assessments? Learning objectives are a way to do that. They are statements and they should be measurable and clearly laid out. You want to see what you want your students to know, what you want them to be able to do, or even what you want them to be able to value at the end of the assignment or the course. A lot of times in that statement, they're action statements. So one of the things I've done is teach college level mathematics, and I would tell my students at the end of this unit, I want you to feel comfortable using Venn diagrams to create statistical tools. So you've got an action verb in there and you want to be specific. There's a lot of different ways to be able to do that. So there are learning objectives that are out in the world. Hewitt Learning actually has a free download on our site if you want to check it out with learning objectives for kindergarten through 8th grade. But you don't need to find one out there somewhere. You can create these yourself. You say, I want to do a unit study. And so at the end of this unit study, I want my child to be able to know how to plant a garden and be able to plant a garden on their own. Or I want my student to be able to divide fractions successfully. Whatever it happens to be, being able to clearly lay out your expectations with these learning objectives is the first step in being able to align with your student and being able to tell them what you expect so that when they succeed, you can both celebrate together instead of saying, but I thought you were going to do this, and them saying, oh, but I did all of this. So having those learning objectives laid out where you both see it and you both understand it is a good first step. So there's a lot of reasons to be able to use assessments. Learning objectives are a part of the assessments. They're what you're assessing did I actually succeed in reaching my learning objective? So if my learning objective is for my student to be able to successfully divide fractions, then the assessment would be to give them a problem with fractions and see if they successfully divide. That would be a simple assessment. And so we use assessments in the homeschooling world all the time. So I want to take a closer look at kinds of assessments. Once we look at the kinds of assessments, then we'll look at certain assessment tools, rubrics and standardized testing specifically. But before we jump into those, I want to take a closer look at different kinds of assessments. Now, this looks like a lot. There is overlap between each of these. We're going to take a look at direct versus indirect measurements, summative versus formative assessments, and then subjective versus objective assessments. So let's take a look at direct measurements. These are ones that are what we normally think of as assessments. These are the things that you see in schools a lot, sometimes in homeschools, sometimes not. It depends on your teaching strategies at home. Their homework, their quizzes, exams, reports, essays, research projects. If you have a rubric for an oral presentation, you've got some sort of direct measurement that you're looking at. On the other side, with the indirect measurement, that's more of a growing appreciation, or seeing how they're integrating what they know into reality, into the rest of life. It might be journals, reflections on what they're studying. So the direct the direct measurements are more clear-cut. Indirect are a little bit more integrative. The next two are summative and formative. Summative is what it sounds like. It's a summation. It adds it all up. So these are typically end of unit or end of year measurements. They can be tests, they could be quizzes, graded activities, graded projects. They're cumulative, so you're looking at everything that you've learned throughout that unit or that year. These are what are typically used to create transcripts and grades. They're the ones that are really, the goal is mastery for these summative measurements. You want kids to get the A+. You want them to get the 100% to show, I really do have a grasp on this material. I have put all this time and all this work into it, and I got it. I have finished the cumulative knowledge of this unit I've got. That's what the summative measurement is. On the other hand, you have formative. And these are more during the process. So before you get to that big final thing, that final grade where you have, I want the A+, you need the step-by-step feedback. So when they give a paper, the feedback, you need to work on your capitalizations. You need to work on indenting your period or your paragraphs. You need to, in math, work on your fractions. So it's those in-between steps where the kids get information on how to grow. These show up all the time in reality. It's kind of the difference between homework from a piano teacher saying, let's practice these scales. Oh, you need to practice this a little bit more. That's a formative assessment. And then the competition that they enter at the end of the year with their piece, that would be the summative assessment. The Independent Innovator Challenge is another one that gives formative assessments where every single student who enters gets feedback on how to improve their submission. So you have these types of things all throughout life where they're not just the final grade, but assessments also include the pieces along the way. Am I on the right track? Am I learning what I need to? Am I headed in the right direction? So it's that immediate dialogue, that immediate feedback. And then finally, we have subjective versus objective assessments. And like I said earlier, there is a lot of overlap here. So the subjective assessments are mainly kind of that feeling, I think that feels right. That feels good. There's no clear standard. Just because you feel this way doesn't necessarily mean the next person sitting in line is going to feel that way. We need both types. We need this as well as the other. But this one kind of is that more, I have the expertise, and so I'm drawing on my years of experience to tell you. I can't give you a firm, you got 70% correct or you got 30% correct. It's not that. It's more, I have years of experience in this field, and so this is what I have learned, and I'm going to glean, and that's what I got. So that's the subjective assessment. And then on the other hand, we have the objective assessment. Those are the ones that there's an exact checklist. You have to get this right. You have to get this right. There's an answer key. 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4. There's a lot more objective. And so a lot of the summative assessments are also objective because they want to see, did you master this subject? Not always the case. Sometimes those summative ones at the end, if you're dealing with poetry, dealing with papers, sometimes there is an aspect of subjectiveness to even those summative assessments. And so it's good to be able to know the different types of assessments because you're going to need each as you go through. Whether or not you call them by these names, you're using them in your homeschool curriculum. And so being able to explain to your child, look, for this topic, I have these expectations. I need you to learn X, Y, and Z and do X, Y, and Z. That would be that objective direct measurement type of assessment. And then other things, it's more of a, you know what, you're reading a lot. I'm happy that every time I turn around, I see your nose in a book. So it feels good. It's that subjective, we're reading enough. And so you need both, and both are valid, assessments of where you're at. So when you're being asked for an end of the year checklist, you can use all of these types of assessments to feed into your portfolio or transcript or however you want to collect that for your child. The objective and summative ones are more common in structured settings because they need that way to be able to grade a large number of students very quickly. The formative ones, though, are often given no matter what the setting is. It's that, here, let's work along the way, let's keep improving, and here's what you need to do to improve. So lots and lots of different types of assessments. Bottom line, pick the type that fits your needs for your assignment at the moment. Within that, the assessments that are objective with the answer key, those are the ones where you can flip to the back of the Saxon math book and go, you got this right, you got this wrong, here, boom, 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 you got it. Those are easy to grade. But what about the ones that are a writing paper or a project? How do you give an assessment for something that's like that and still have it be objective, clearly laid out, so that you and your child aren't fighting over, well, I did what you asked, well, no, you didn't. How do you do that? Rubrics are a fantastic tool. Rubrics are just a laying out of expectations step by step. It exceeds expectations, meets expectations. You're close but not quite there, you missed the boat entirely. So you lay it out in the columns with the different levels. And then you write in the rows, what are you looking for? So the example I have here is for a basic writing class. And you can see we're looking at just basic sentence writing. Did they get 3 to 4 complete sentences? If they did, they went above and beyond what I ever thought possible. If they only got 2 complete sentences, that's the bare minimum of what I want. 1 complete sentence, they're close, but they really need that second sentence. And if they don't do it at all, that's below the level. And so you clearly delineate what your expectations are for that paper. Now, for a high school student, you'll probably want to do it a little bit, instead of having capitalization, you'll want to have grammar. But then you also want it broken down in those boxes of, what do I mean when I say good grammar? I'm looking for verb agreement. I'm looking for proper capitalization. I'm looking for, what are you looking for in that paper? The checklist in the handout that for this workshop has some of those different things that you can look for in a writing paper. And then it also has some examples of how to add it up and grade a paper. They're checklists that Hewitt teachers in the past have used to be able to grade Lightning Lit courses. So rubrics are a fantastic tool for being able to have you and your students see eye to eye, and for them to be able to see where they're missing things. And so if they are below expectations in one area but exceeds expectations in the other, now you know where you need to focus the next lesson. You know that you need to give a little bit more help on capitalization, but they're doing fine. They can write till the cows come home, but it's a mess. And so, pause, slow down, and get a little bit more on the actual structure of the sentence. It informs where you want to do your next lesson and what you want your next steps to be. So rubrics are great for formative assessments as well as those end of unit assessments. So let's take a closer look at standardized testing. Standardized testing for a lot of people is like a trip to the dentist. You have to do it, but do I really want to? And it's a fair question. It's a fair debate. Standardized testing really came into popularity during the Industrial Revolution, where they needed everybody to fit a certain mold. And it was kind of the education of the masses. And so teachers were needing to be able to assess a large number of students all at once as efficiently as possible, and making sure their kids met these goals. And it had its purpose. But in today's world, we live in a world more of information than of industry. We're looking more at, can I process the information that's coming at me rather than can I regurgitate certain things? Which makes standardized testing hard for a lot of people. There's also research that's shown that the higher anxiety is in testing, the lower the results are. And so standardized testing doesn't always accurately reflect a student's abilities. That's why standardized testing needs to be part of a larger picture. You cannot rely solely on standardized testing, even if you're required to do it. So all of these things come into, well, why do I want to test if there's all these issues with it? Add to that fact that kids aren't cookie cutters. We're not on an assembly line knocking out kids. Just because they have the same manufacture date doesn't mean the kid has to be in the same spot academically as the other kid with the same manufacture date. That's not how kids work. And so while there are issues with standardized testing, there are also reasons to be able to give it a chance and use it as a tool. There's a lot of different standardized tests out there. The CAT is a popular one, and I apologize, this graphic I'm looking at now is slightly out of date. The CAT 5 does have an untimed version as well. I just caught that. So the PASS test is an untimed test. The CAT can be untimed, and so and the Stanford has an untimed option. So if you have a child with test anxiety, an untimed option is a good route to go. There's also, depending on your student, some tests are paper and pencil, others are on the computer. Some tests have to be taken at a testing center or with a certified teacher, others can be taken at home. There's a lot of different options within that. And so finding one that fits your student the best really is the best route to go. I want to pause for a moment and talk about the PASS test because it really is kind of unique. Most tests, you order grade 5 test for a grade 5 student, and every grade 5 student takes the same test. Both the MAP and the PASS test have your students take kind of a pre-test, and the past test specifically has a student take a pre-test, and then depending on how they do on that test, they will take a different level. So a third grade student would take the third grade pre-test, and then they take it and get it, the parent grades it right then and says, okay, it looks like you got this many correct. That means you're going to take level 14. And they flip to the level 14 in the book and they take level 14. The goal being that the student is taking a test at a level that's not too hard and not too easy. Because if you get 100% on a standardized test, then you really haven't accurately tested your ability. You got 100%, but you don't know where your limit is. You could be beyond that. On the other hand, if you get below a 50%, a lot of times kids just give up because it's too hard. And so you really want to test at that sweet spot where it's just hard enough to be challenging, but not easy enough that you don't reach your limit. And so the PASS test is designed to be able to do that, and it's got a couple of grades there. It doesn't do K-12, it's just the 3rd through the 8th graders. So there are different options depending on your needs for students to be able to get their assessments done. So how do you prepare? Because a lot of kids have test anxiety. I mean, how many of us want to go sit and take a big long test and have the whole world hinge on the results of this one test? That's what it feels like a lot of times with these standardized tests. So the big thing is to talk with your students about the difference between some of those assessments that we talked about earlier and these tests, these standardized tests. The end of unit, the summative assessment, the goal of those assessments is mastery. Did you get 100%? Do you understand the concepts? If not, we need to go back and fill in the holes. That's what you want for those end of unit assessments. You want 100% mastery. These standardized tests don't work the same way. They're more of a knowledge check. Let's see, out of this vast amount of knowledge, how much of it do you know? You don't know it all. Nobody knows it all. So out of all of this, how much do you know? If you know a lot in this area, great. Let's keep pushing you on in that area. If you're weak in this area, that's fine. Let's come back in and fill some of these holes in. That's the purpose of standardized tests, is really to see those strengths and weaknesses and push the limits. They're designed for your student not to get 100% correct. They will miss problems. And so clarifying with your student that not only are they likely to miss problems, but that's perfectly okay, takes some of that pressure off, the stress of that test anxiety. A lot of these kids also, where the fear comes from is the unknown, the uncertainty. And so getting some practice in, there's CAT test prep booklets. IXL is a website that has a lot of resources. Spectrum workbooks is another one where a lot of people go to get practice. So being able to look and say, this is kind of what they look like. Let's practice, get you familiar with the types of questions that are asked. That's great to be able to do. Along those lines, also knowing the student knowing what to expect. Where am I going to take it? Am I going to take it at home? Am I going to take it into a classroom, in a tutoring center? Is it going to be bright? Is it going to be dark? Is it going to be noisy? Is it going to be quiet? If you have one of the tests that you get to do at home, maybe working together to set up the testing environment so they know where it's at and they have a little bit of control over where they're going to test, if that's possible, is a good way to do it. Kind of working out a plan of attack. And having that plan helps decrease some of that test anxiety. But ultimately, each kid is different. And even though these tests look at percentiles and say, hey, this is where your student is compared to all other 5th graders, that's a useful tool to say, okay, my kid's going to need a little bit more time to be able to reach these same things. That's fine. And knowing that is fine. And so the standardized test, that percentile, where you are in regards to other students of that same age, isn't so much a I'm ahead or I'm a behind, it's a where do I go next? What tools do I need to be able to operate in life? And so if I'm down in the 15th percentile and I'm way behind in my math, we need to get a little bit more structure in our math. We need to get a little bit more help. If I'm way ahead, great, let's get some more resources and help push this in this area. And so these standardized tests aren't a judgment of how things are going. They're a tool to be able to say, what else can I do? Where can I go? Where can I help my child the best? And so switching the mindset of assessments is really something that is critical for homeschoolers to be able to say, I want what's best for my child. I want to give them accurate feedback. I want them to know and take ownership of where their strengths are. And I want them to be able to ask for help in their weaknesses. And so whether you use a standardized test, whether it's rubrics, whether it's just a checklist, however you assess, keeping that goal in mind of let's have a clear objective. This is what I want my student to know. This is how we're going to get there. And then be able to celebrate when they've achieved it and say, hey, look, you made it. I know fractions were your nightmare. You hated it, but you just divided that fraction and did it perfectly. Let's go celebrate. Or, I know you didn't want to take that standardized test, but you did, and we're done. Let's go celebrate. So using those assessments to celebrate the wins as well as filling in the gaps is really the key. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can contact me through our website, hewittlearning.org. hewittlearning.org. And you can reach me there with any questions you have. I'd be more than happy to answer or have a dialogue. Let me know what I can do to help. And thanks for coming today.